The civil rights movement in the USA, a struggle for equality and justice. The civil rights movement in the United States, spanning the 1950s and 1960s, was a transformative era in American history. It was a struggle for racial equality, justice, and the dismantling of systemic segregation and discrimination against African Americans. This movement, characterized by nonviolent protests, legal challenges, and grassroots activism, fundamentally reshaped American society. Key events such as the Montgomery Bus Boycott, the Little Rock Nine, the Freedom Rides, and the March on Washington, along with the leadership of figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., were pivotal in advancing civil rights. This essay argues that the civil rights movement was a multifaceted and collective effort that challenged institutionalized racism and laid the foundation for a more equitable society. Background: the roots of the civil rights movement can be traced back to the legacy of slavery, the failure of Reconstruction, and the establishment of Jim Crow laws in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These laws enforced racial segregation in the South, relegating African Americans to second-class citizenship, despite the 14th and 15th Amendments, which granted equal protection under the law and voting rights. African Americans faced widespread disenfranchisement, economic exploitation, and violence. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, founded in 1909, and other organizations began challenging these injustices through legal means. But it was not until the mid-20th century that a mass movement emerged to demand change. The role of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. emerged as one of the most prominent leaders of the civil rights movement. A Baptist minister and advocate of nonviolent resistance inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, King galvanized millions with his powerful oratory and unwavering commitment to justice. His philosophy of nonviolence, articulated in his famous letter from Birmingham jail, emphasized love and peaceful protest as tools for social change. King's leadership was instrumental in organizing key events such as the Montgomery Bus Boycott, the March on Washington, and the Selma to Montgomery marches. His iconic "I Have a Dream" speech remains a defining moment in American history, symbolizing the movement's aspirations for racial harmony and equality. The Montgomery Bus Boycott. The Montgomery Bus Boycott 1955-1956 marked a turning point in the civil rights movement, sparked by Rosa Parks' arrest for refusing to give up her seat to a white passenger. The boycott was a year-long protest against segregated public transportation, led by Dr. King and the Montgomery Improvement Association. African Americans organized carpools and walked miles to work, demonstrating the power of collective action. The boycott ended with a Supreme Court ruling declaring segregation on public buses unconstitutional, a significant victory for the movement. The struggle for equal education, the Little Rock Nine. The fight for equal education was another critical aspect of the civil rights movement. In 1957, 9 African American students, known as the Little Rock Nine, attempted to integrate Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, despite the Supreme Court's ruling in Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, that declared segregation in public schools unconstitutional. The students faced violent opposition from white mobs and the Arkansas National Guard. President Dwight D. Eisenhower eventually intervened, sending federal troops to ensure the students' safety. Their bravery highlighted the resistance to desegregation and the federal government's role in enforcing civil rights. The sit-ins and freedom rides. The sit-ins and freedom rides were direct actions that challenged segregation in public spaces and interstate travel. In 1960, four African-American college students staged a sit-in at a Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, sparking a wave of similar protests across the South. The Freedom Rides, organized by the Congress of Racial Equality Corps in 1961, aimed to test the enforcement of desegregation laws in interstate bus terminals. Despite facing violent attacks, the Freedom Riders drew national attention to the brutality of segregation and pressured the federal government to enforce civil rights laws. The March on Birmingham. The 1963 campaign in Birmingham, Alabama, was a strategic effort to end segregation in one of the most racially divided cities in the South. Led by Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. The campaign included sit-ins, marches, and boycotts. The violent response from local authorities, including the use of police dogs and fire hoses against peaceful protesters, was broadcast nationwide, shocking the conscience of the nation. The campaign ultimately led to the desegregation of public facilities in Birmingham and underscored the moral urgency of the civil rights movement. The March on Washington. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, held on August 28, 1963, was a landmark event in the civil rights movement. Attended by over 250,000 people, it was a peaceful demonstration advocating for civil and economic rights for African Americans. Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, delivered at the Lincoln Memorial, remains one of the most iconic moments in American history. The march helped build momentum for the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Freedom Summer and the Selma to Montgomery March. Freedom Summer 1964 was a voter registration drive aimed at increasing African American political participation in Mississippi. Organized by civil rights groups, the campaign faced violent opposition, including the murder of three activists: James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner. Despite the dangers, Freedom Summer brought national attention to voter suppression and contributed to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Selma to Montgomery marches in 1965, led by Dr. King and other activists, were a response to the denial of voting rights to African Americans in Alabama. The violent repression of the first march, known as Bloody Sunday, galvanized support for the Voting Rights Act, which prohibited racial discrimination in voting. Conclusion: the civil rights movement was a monumental struggle for justice and equality that transformed American society through nonviolent resistance, legal challenges, and grassroots activism. African Americans and their allies dismantled institutionalized racism and secured significant legislative victories. The leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the courage of individuals like the Little Rock Nine and the Freedom Riders, and the collective efforts of countless activists were instrumental in advancing civil rights. While the movement achieved remarkable progress, the fight for racial equality continues today, reminding us of the enduring importance of justice, solidarity, and the power of collective action. The civil rights movement remains a testament to the resilience and determination of those who dare to dream of a better world.